Melanie Phillips is one of the most right-wing commentators in the British mainstream media. She's a columnist for the Times newspaper and regularly appears on the BBC. She's a social conservative, but is also incredibly controversial, not least because she was cited at length by the far-right mass murderer Anders Breivik before he killed 77 people in 2011. Now, I often don't pay much attention to what Phillips has to say. You've probably guessed why. But in a new column, she really lets the cat out of the bag, and I had to talk about it here tonight. The headline in the Times reads as follows: Militant unions thrive in a weaker society. Extremism is increasing as economic and political objectives merge with the culture wars. Phillips starts by documenting something very real, as we've just spoken, the rising wave of industrial action in this country across a wave of professions, not just the NHS. But then it gets rather strange. Why is this all happening now? Why is everyone seemingly on strike? Mrs. Phillips thinks she has the explanation. The short answer is that the unions are taking advantage of a cultural and political vacuum that has been deepening for years. There has been a profound loss of trust in the entire constitutional order. To many people, if not most, politicians of all parties appear rudderless and unprincipled. The bonds of nation, inherited culture, and normative values that once held everyone together have been shattered. In his new book, Values, Voice and Virtue, Professor Matthew Goodwin argues persuasively that politics is being driven by a new elite, composed of the professional, educated middle classes who wield immense economic, cultural and political power. Committed to universal laws and institutions, they no longer believe elections matter much anymore. The rest of the public has been left, effectively, disenfranchised. This has led to the emergence of a ruthless militant agenda among trade unions and other groups that have seized their chance. While the Labour Party has freed itself from its capture by the hard left under Jeremy Corbyn, militancy and power have flowed from mainstream politics into the trade unions and other groups, fueling the rise of street politics, which many now believe has greater legitimacy than representative democracy. Phillips goes on to list various baddies, the Occupy movement, Black Lives Matter, Just Stop Oil, Extinction Rebellion, before really getting to the heart of her argument. There is a still more profound agenda driving this turmoil. Economic and political objectives emerging with the culture wars. This is all too visible in the civil service. Formerly crucial in keeping the show on the road, regardless of the manifold inadequacies of elected politicians, civil servants are fast becoming synonymous with incompetence, ideological brainwashing, and politicised obstruction. She's clearly never watched Yes, Minster. This has nothing to do with inclusion and everything to do with destroying the normative values of society. Democratic governance is based upon mutual respect, shared goals, and civil liberties. Under the sanctimonious pretense of inclusion and empowerment, this is being replaced by coercion, threats, and bullying as political, cultural, and moral boundaries are smashed. It's Britain's post-democracy moment. Now, I think this is hugely revealing because it shows what the right actually has to offer when confronted with economic stagnation and permanently falling living standards. And that's to talk about drag artists, pronouns, and LGBT authors. Because for all their attacks on the left and its apparent obsession with the culture wars and identity politics, it's the right to amplify and feed off these debates precisely because they have nothing to say on wages, people getting poorer, the housing crisis, and rising bills. Which is how you get the bizarre spectacle of a columnist who is routinely on the BBC explaining strikes that involve millions by talking about people who use they-them pronouns while working at the civil service. Ash, it's a really instructive article, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is an instructive article. And I think it does give you some insight into where the right are right now. I mean, first, this is something which you see in the pages of the Times and the Telegraph and the Spectator an awful lot, which is you've got a set of journalists who really have had everything that they've ever wanted. They wanted Brexit, they got Brexit. They wanted year upon year of Conservative government, they got year upon year of Conservative government. They wanted an increasingly authoritarian right-wing populism, they got that too. And there aren't thou satisfied. So what do you blame it on? Is the country a shithole because actually your ideas are the problem? You got everything you wanted and it was enacted in the vandalism that we've seen carried out by conservative governments since 2010? Or is the problem that people call you a dickhead on Twitter? Right? They go, oh, it's the people call me a dickhead on Twitter. Now, in some ways, that is just your standard columnist narcissism. The universe revolves around me. So if someone's mean to me, that's actually a matter of national security. But I think what Melanie Phillips is doing here is going a step further. She is saying that the only form of democratic legitimacy is democratic majoritarianism. So our participation in society is limited to going to the ballot box once every 4 years. And whatever the result of that election is, we all have to abide by it in every single sphere of our lives. So if the Conservatives win a majority in 2019, that means everybody has to live by those norms and values. We're not just talking about legislation and the right to pass legislation. We're talking about ownership of our souls. So we have to think of ourselves as perfect conservative robots who want nothing more than what Jacob Rees-Mogg says is good for us. Now, she calls that respect for representative democracy. I call that a kind of fascism, right? It is something which demands the total subordination of civil society to the result of an election, which is very skewed by first past the post, which is very, very skewed by the disenfranchisement of the young and the poor and people who are less able to participate in standard elections.